Hey everyone, this is part 3 of I'm a monster created by the government to hunt other monsters. If you missed the first 2 parts, they'll be linked in the top of the description. Go check them out. Through the walls I crawled, my claws quietly clicking against the pipes and cement as all the vermin scattered in my presence. After I put an end to Dr. West, the agency had been riled up, looking all over the entire state for me, their prized killing machine. All in all, that's what I was to them, a means to an end, an attack dog. Anything they offered me was only to keep me in the dark, to prevent me from turning on them. It was nothing but false compassion. Once I had gotten a taste of freedom, I knew what had to happen. I knew I couldn't allow myself to keep being their puppet. So I left, got captured, and then broke out and killed the woman who created me. A woman who was much closer in personality to a witch rather than a scientist. For what I perceived as about a month, I'd been living in the walls of the facility, feeding off whatever rodents and small animals I could get my claws on. Everything from possums to spiders to rats. You see, this way, I can live right under their noses. Sure, it's cramped and whatnot, but it's a sacrifice that is well worth it. I could tell the search teams they were sending out were getting exhausted. It was becoming a waste of resources going out there to try and find me. The higher-ups probably knew it, whoever they were. Not that it was truly a concern of mine. So one night, I decided I was going to leave. I was done being cooped up in the walls of this building. I figured I had given the situation enough time for the agency to slow down on their efforts, at least for now. I had a plan and an ally, someone on the inside who could help me. Dr. John. He owed me for saving his life previously. I figured asking for a favor like this shouldn't be an issue. I got down on all fours and crept my way into the air ducts. The air ducts that I was now all too familiar with, seeing as I'd been using them to eavesdrop on all the personnel in the building. That's how I found out things were getting less tense. I crawled my way over to the science wing, near the area that I was created, being careful to keep my claws from scratching any of the material and giving away my location by making too much noise. No, John. This all started because you're an incompetent fool. 16A is gone because you just couldn't listen to West. And now not only is she probably 6 feet under, but that monstrosity she created is out there eyeing us next. The voice bellowed out from below. I trailed further up the duct and peered down through one of the covers, picking up the familiar scent of Dr. John. The room below was a pristine, sterilized white, like pretty much all the labs in this building. Dr. John and his apparent rival stood less than 2 feet apart. The other scientist shouted at him with a fury that I had never seen before. What was I supposed to do? Came John's rebuttal. West is a psychopath. Hell, most of you in here are. I don't even know why I took this job in the first place. The other scientist recoiled, taking a step back and adjusting his lab coat. John, he stepped closer. We both know full well why you took this job. You want to study the things that aren't of this earth, the things that go bump in the night, right? Because it was one of those things that took your daughter, isn't it? Immediately, John cocked his fist and threw a vicious blow at the man, following up his punch with an angry tirade. I swear to God, don't you ever use my daughter like that again, do you hear me? Keep her name out of your mouth before I shove a bottle of acid in it. The scientist who had taken the hit swung back, connecting a punch with John's left cheek. They quickly broke down into a full-on fight, a windmill of punches and grappling to get the upper hand on one another. It seemed appropriate at this point to intervene. I slipped my claws through the slits in the cover to the air duct, applied some force, and tore it off. And by the time they both realized that I was on the ceiling above them, I had already dropped down. "What the?" exclaimed the unnamed scientist as I pounced at him, and I cut his speech short. I quickly lifted him up by the neck and slung his body across the room, as if he were a stuffed animal, causing him to slam violently into the wall and be knocked unconscious. "Subject 16A, thank you. Where did you come from?" Dr. John inquired. "Braun," I stated bluntly. "My name is Braun." "Right, sorry, Braun it is. Once again, thanks for that. And also, I didn't get the chance to thank you for sparing me a while back when you escaped. But I see you didn't share the same mercy for Dr. West. I honestly don't blame you." John tilted his head up as I towered over him, fixating on my light bulb-shaped eyes and the contrast of my blue skin to the polished white marble of the room. "I spared your life, Doctor," I said. "Now I need you to perform a similar courtesy for me." "And that is?" John raised an eyebrow. "Help me escape unseen. Get out of this wretched place. I've been here long enough, feeding off the creatures that lurk in the walls. It's time for me to go back out where I belong, to freedom." John paused for a moment, thinking critically about what I had just said. "Yeah, I think I can do that. After the higher-ups decided Dr. West was more than likely dead, they bumped me up to head of the science division. That choice was done more out of necessity than qualification, but they needed someone in charge as quickly as possible. Security keeps an eye on everything that goes in and out of this building, so that will be a bit of a challenge." "I'll worry about the physical threats," I replied, spreading my fingers and allowing my claws to be put on full display. "There's also one more thing," John added. "I want to come with you. I have a feeling the higher-ups aren't too happy with me being at fault for letting you out of captivity in the first place. Things are getting strange around here. People aren't telling me stuff they should be. Something tells me that I won't be in this position for very long." I simply nodded my head in agreement, fully empathizing with John's decision. Although we had different reasons for our long-awaited departure from the agency, it was clear we both understood full well they aren't what they pretend to be. After a bit more discussion, John and I got to work on how to get ourselves out of here. I, of course, was mainly reduced to sneaking around and doing reconnaissance, while John played the system from the inside, manipulating the guards and using his title to gain access to whatever we may have needed. John called over one of the commanding guards with a special keycard that we needed to access the weapons room. In case things went wrong, I needed John to be able to defend himself, so I told him to stock up on whatever he was capable of concealing underneath his lab coat. It wasn't just the human security personnel that we had to worry about, but other cryptids had been captured and contained in the building. At first, the plan was to sneak past and avoid absolutely everyone and everything. But then the idea of using one or two of the cryptids as a distraction came to mind. It seemed as the first option was highly unlikely to be successful. Later that night, when the sun was beginning to set, and the activity in the facility died down, I went back up into the vents to look around to make sure the coast was clear, on the way to the cryptid containment cells. Soon enough, these shifts would rotate and the night guards would emerge. I set my sights on one of the Wendigo cages, the reason being that one, the guards had the firepower to subdue a Wendigo without much blood being shed. And two, because Wendigos are fast, agile, and quick. They're deceitful and manipulate the voices of the victims' loved ones. I would know, seeing as I've had to take down a few myself. Once I arrived at the cryptid containment cells, I looked up and down the hall, making sure no guards were currently posted. I didn't have much time before they would switch shifts, so I had to move fast. I tightly gripped the keycard Dr. John had given me, intending to use it on the cage. I crept across the ceiling on all fours, scaled my way down the wall, and stood up in a bipedal fashion, staring at the Wendigo of choice through the glass of his cell, which had been specially soundproofed in order to prevent him from successfully using his voice mimicking ability. He glared at me angrily through the glass with those sunken eyes in that deer skull, clearly still bitter that I was the main entity who had been the reason he was in here in the first place. I swiped the keycard to his cell. A quiet beep went off and the glass wall began to lower itself into the floor, allowing the Wendigo to freely move forward. Immediately, he attacked me by lunging. I grabbed him by the rotting flesh of his body and gripped my other hand around the mouth of his deer skull, keeping his jaw restrained with my strength. "You'll obey me or I'll kill you. Is that understood?" I snarled, baring my teeth to intimidate the opposing creature and establish dominance. The Wendigo still tried to wiggle free and fight the hold that I had put him in, but I only tightened my grip and kept him in place as he fought to get away. In order to intimidate him further, I spread my fingers with my free hand and allowed my claws to be seen by him just inches away from his eyes. It was clear that he knew that my threat was serious. He quickly gave up fighting when he realized my physical power was too great for him to combat. As I held him in place, the Wendigo then began to mimic the voice of Dr. John in order to speak to me. "You aren't like the others. You are strong, very strong," he complimented, his jaw not moving as he spoke. "Thank you. Now what I need you to do is distract the humans, the ones in the black. Do not kill them or cause serious harm to them. They will surely eliminate you if you do so. And believe me when I say, they have the means to put an end to your existence." The Wendigo stood silent for a moment, contemplating my statement as he laid against the wall, still pinned down by my hold. "And what should I get in return for my efforts?" he asked, his voice almost echoing within my head. "I will come back for you. I will help you get back to freedom, so long as you make me one promise that you'll be faithful to." "And that is," the cryptid scowled, his mouth still motionless. "You shall never kill and seek out another human again. You shall only feast on what nature provides. Unless a human has initiated conflict and desires to cause you great harm, you will leave them be. I know what you are, how you became this monstrosity. But if you are able to fight your lust, your thirst for their flesh and bone, I will see it that you are free once again if you assist me." I had never seen a more shocked expression on any entity before, human, animal, or cryptid. The Wendigo was genuinely dumbfounded to be shown such understanding and compassion. I lowered my guard, taking my claw off of his jaw, and I allowed him to straighten his posture. "What are you?" he asked, still continuing to mimic the voice of John. "I am not them, not these ones. The humans are worth saving, but these ones are corrupted far beyond repair. I know that you were one of them some time ago, and there is still that spirit of empathy dwelling deep inside you, even if your bloodlust tells you otherwise." I could tell that he was highly conflicted. He silently went back and forth in his mind, trying to grasp the gravity of what I was proposing. I encouraged him to hurry up and come to a decision. We wouldn't have much longer before the night shift guards started making their rounds. "I shall do it," he finally announced to me, tilting the nose of his deer skull upwards and focusing those lifeless eyes towards the end of the hallway. "I will return for you. You have my word," I said, latching onto the wall next to me as I began to crawl back up into the air duct entrance. We gave each other one last glance of recognition before going our separate ways. I did truly intend to come back for him, sooner than one might think. I had spent so much time serving humanity. I had never tried to connect with other cryptids, not like this. In all fairness, most creatures usually didn't care for my sympathy, but he was different. There was a spark in him, lasting remnants of his humanity. I just needed to keep doing everything I could to bring it to the surface. Security breach at level 5. All possible agents engage. Came the sound of a female voice over the speaker. It was apparent that they had realized the Wendigo was out of containment. Time was running out. I had sped up and scurried along the duct, following Dr. John's scent all the way to the north end of the building, where he would be waiting for me. I had released the Wendigo on the south end. I could hear the footsteps of all these soldiers progressing down the opposite direction that I was heading in. Most of them cursing and swearing about having to respond to the security alert at such a late hour. I made it to where I needed to be, climbed out of the air ducts, and dropped down into the transportation garage, the place where shipments of supplies were sent in and out from the facility. John was waiting for me in one of the transport trucks, the engine running and the back doors to the storage crate open. I jumped in the back of the truck, closing the doors behind me and heading over closer to the cab where John was driving. "A job well done, Doctor," I complimented as he pulled out and headed for the exit of the building perimeter. Normally, the place was looked over by guards and the towers and Wendigos, but since they were all busy with the Wendigo, that wasn't much of an issue. Even these security cameras weren't able to detect anything out of the ordinary. The windows on the truck were heavily tinted, obscuring the figure of Dr. John, buying us enough time to disappear. So far, everything had gone the way it should have. We had made it out, seemingly undetected. The plan had truly gone perfectly. I spoke with the Wendigo. "We have to go back for him sometime soon," I told John, to which he snapped his head back in response, taking his eyes off the road momentarily. "What?" He practically spazzed. I made a promise to him that we would return and retrieve him, to release him into freedom. "You want to let another Wendigo roam free?" "Yeah, because that's just what the world needs, isn't it?" "You fail to understand him the way that I do. He is not like the others. I think that I can get him to overcome his bloodlust, to not feed on your species. He's a damn Wendigo, Braun. Are you really just gonna trust what he says, because you struck up a deal with him?" "Just keep driving, Doctor," I said sternly. We had gotten about 12 miles out. By this point, they had more than likely subdued and put the Wendigo back into containment, and were gonna soon realize that Dr. John was gone from the building. "We're past the point of no return," John announced. "I can't ever go back. Not without being shot anyway. We'll devise a plan, Doctor, that I can guarantee you, but I will go back for him, whether you join me or not." John went silent for a moment as he took a turn, clearly wanting this disagreement to cease. "We need to hurry up and leave this truck behind," he said, ignoring my statement. "There's a good chance they could have a tracker on it." I questioned as to why they didn't put one on me. I added, "When Dr. West was in the process of designing you, she never thought that it would be necessary. She thought that you would be grateful for what the agency was giving you, as far as shelter and food. For a woman who was so scientifically gifted and smart, she was quite the fool. Trust me when I say that you made the right choice when you chewed her up. The world is much better off without her." "I presume she showed you very little kindness as well," I responded. "Definitely. Always belittling me every chance she got, no matter what I did. She was always the better scientist. Even took credit for some of the work here and there." Once a few hours had passed and we had traveled nearly 100 miles, John pulled the truck into an abandoned parking lot for an old law firm building, making this portion of our trip come to an uneventful end. "From here, we'll head over to the nearby forest to wait it out for a bit," John pronounced as he retrieved a handgun from his pocket. "I also brought a grenade, if you were wondering." "Brilliant idea, Doctor. But you remember what must happen when things calm down," I told him. Yeah. He waved me off in a lighthearted fashion. We both exited the vehicle through our separate ways and began a journey over to the woods. It was only minutes after when I stopped us after an idea had hit me. "Shall we destroy the truck?" I proposed, giving John a subtle glance. "No, that'll attract way too much attention and come off as suspicious. For now, just let them find it. They'll be busy with that piece of evidence and less focused on us." We continued our trek into the untamed landscape. I'll be truthful when I say it felt quite irritating having to move so slow in comparison to what I was used to in order to keep pace with John. The trees were much more dense and plentiful in this particular forest, more so than any other I had seen before. Vegetation was all around us, growing with seemingly no intention of slowing down. We were only about a mile deep into the terrain. I intended to go at least 10 times that before we had stopped for the day. Suddenly, I picked up a scent, a strong, intoxicating smell of something from above. I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but it was coming closer by the second. I could tell that it was moving fast, right in our vicinity. "Prepare yourself. I can smell something strong," I said, to which John gripped his handgun. I glanced up into the sky, trying to spot whatever was approaching us. "Do you know what it is?" John asked. A nervous expression crept its way onto his face. "No, but you need to get down." Before I could finish my sentence, I was quickly hit with a powerful blow hard enough to send me soaring through the air and slamming into a nearby tree. The hit had dazed me, but only slightly. I was able to quickly get up and recover, standing up and finally getting a look at my attacker. In front of me was a giant avian creature of some sort. It was massive, even taller than me as it stood on the ground. Its wingspan had to be more than 20 feet, speaking of which. Its wings were a dark purple color, most of its body was. The head of the creature was shaped like that of a rectangle. It didn't have much of a neck, but towards its lower half, it possessed huge, razor-sharp talons that could more than likely hold an entire car in them. Its anatomy was as terrifying as it was strange, not to mention its lengthy black beak with multiple rows of jagged teeth, some of which had flesh still stuck between them from previous meals and victims. Blood also coated the edges of its beak. John immediately began to fire his handgun at the cryptid, hitting it with several shots in the wings. This seemed to only anger the entity, despite the fact that its bullets penetrated the tissue. It spread its wings further and let out an ear-shattering screech in John's direction. I quickly approached the cryptid to begin my attack. He turned his head to me, preparing for our fight. I pounced up from the ground and onto the creature's body, raising my claws to slash at its head before it subtly jolted itself upwards into the air, causing me to fall off and back onto the ground. John had tried to run, but the creature was far too swift for him, swooping down and grabbing his tender figure in those massive talons. "Help! Braun, please help!" he screamed as the cryptid began to lift him into the air, looking at John hungrily as he eagerly waited to feast on his organs. The creature then began to fly in the opposite direction, going deeper into the forest. I quickly got down on all fours and began to chase after it, putting every ounce of effort possible into keeping up with the entity. I leaped over rocks, launched onto trees, and jumped from one trunk to another. This creature was fast, but I was gaining ground and closing the gap. The only problem was that I would have to wait until he landed to follow up with an attack, and by that point, John could either be dead or severely injured. "Let me go," he shouted, before trying to kick his way out of the creature's talons, even attempting to shoot him once again, but the gun had clicked when he pulled the trigger, confirming the magazine was empty. I noticed that as the chase went on, the trees in the forest seemed to mysteriously become bigger, more girthy, and even taller in height. The trunks were becoming large enough to house a family of entities inside. This forest was by far a cryptid hotspot. It broke all sorts of biological and natural laws. A perfect place for some curious humans to wander into and find themselves being stalked by whatever lurks within these trees. When the avian creature had started to slow down with John still in its grasp, I picked up the scent of several more beings that smelled just like him. I turned my attention upwards. High up in what was by far the biggest tree we had passed so far, sat a gigantic nest, filled with several smaller versions of the avian creature that had snatched John up. It was a female after all. Offspring, I thought. This thing was going to feed John alive to its offspring. Despite being much smaller than their mother and lacking any sort of teeth, they were still sizable enough to easily rip John apart, as if he were nothing more than a worm with limbs. And without any ammo left in his weapon to defend himself, that would soon become his agonizing reality. I latched onto the trunk of the tree and hurried north as fast as I could. The offspring of the creature pointed their beaks and squawked excitedly at the sight of their mother approaching with a fresh meal. The hunger was palpable in their eyes. I was halfway up the tree when the mother let out another ground rumbling screech in my direction. The hideous mother had dropped John into the nest. The offspring immediately converged in him, and I was only feet away. "Hey, stay back, get away from me," he demanded, desperately trying to swat them off and delay his impending doom. One lunged its beak in John's direction, to which John responded by throwing a punch and clocking him at the tip. Even though it did practically nothing to stop the young creature, his courage was admirable. His seconds were dwindling, and he didn't have much time left. One of the offspring had grabbed him by the arm when I finally made it up into the nest, and jammed my claws into the underside of his beak, causing it to release a shrill so unpleasant my very body vibrated from the force. You gotta remember, my hearing is far better than a human's. So while John had complained, my ear canals were brutally stinging from these sound waves bursting through them. The mother was extremely distraught with what I had done to her child. In retaliation, she attempted to swoop down and ram me with her beak, but it missed and instead impacted John, who fell out of the nest and tumbled down to a lower branch on the tree, hanging on for dear life as I tried to make quick work of these satanic birds. Two of the offspring had simultaneously grabbed my arms. I could feel the slimy, saliva-coated flesh of their throats as my hands sank deeper into their esophagus. I countered their efforts by flipping my hands palms up while still inside them, and then straightened my fingers to extend my claws outwards. This caused them to pierce through the backs of their necks, which I then followed up by dragging my arms vertically towards the sky until I had reached their brains, instantly killing them. They dropped to the floor of the nest as dark purple blood had oozed out from their now punctured skulls, soaking the nest beneath us. The mother was now furious, angrier than ever before. It was obvious that she wanted to tear me to shreds and make me suffer for what I had done. She flew and did a U-turn in midair, circling back and flying towards me as fast as possible, while performing another one of her deafening shrills. She proceeded to pull her wings in closer toward her body, increasing her speed as she barreled towards me. I drew my claws out, preparing for the inevitable collision. When she hit me, I was sent flying off the nest and slamming into the top of another tree. But with the speed and force that I had been collided with, I fell down nearly the entire length of the tree, snapping and cracking a multitude of branches on my way as I descended. When my fall had come to a halt, I was preparing to jump and crawl back to the top to continue the fight just before John's voice had stopped me. "Braun, take this," he had shouted from below. I turned my attention and lowered my eyes to John, who stood at the bottom of the tree with boots on the ground. I concluded that he must have climbed down the branches while I was going to work on the aerial cryptid. In his hand, he held a grenade, which I am quite familiar with. I had seen men use them all the time back at the agency during our expeditions. Wait, doctor, don't pull the pin just yet, I commanded, holding out a hand towards his direction to motion him to seize his movements. I was going to use it when she had snatched me up, but I couldn't get a chance to reach into my lab coat, he continued on. When she flies down here, shove this down her beak and take out that flying son of a gun. I wiggled two of my fingernails in an overhear motion. John tossed the grenade to me. I caught it and grasped it firmly in my hand as I tilted my head up to the sky. The giant bird was making another circular lap, coming back for a third blow. Wanted to time it just right to avoid a disaster, I made sure to wait for the perfect opportunity, concentrating on how fast she was closing the distance and deciding from there. I pulled the pin when she was around 50 feet away. The intent, hunger for revenge, and malice in her beady eyes were unlike anything I had witnessed before. She truly wanted to make sure that I suffered at her hand. Once she got in range, I jumped up, wrapping myself around her feathery body and digging my claws into her back, making sure to drag them up and slice her flesh for some extra damage. She howled, trying to wiggle mid-flight and shake me off, but it was futile. I reached into her beak during screams of agony and shoved the grenade down her throat as quickly as possible, making sure to avoid those serrated teeth. I then retracted my claws from her back and let go, falling off and sliding across the ground while kicking up dirt from the leftover momentum of our struggle. I quickly recovered, getting up and turning around to witness what was about to come. She kept soaring through the air, presumably to make another circle to hit me, but as she began to turn, a small but sudden boom erupted from the depths of her beak, echoing off the surrounding trees. Nearly half of her head had been taken off and destroyed by the explosion, exposing her weirdly shaped skull and coating the vegetation nearby in her now signature dark purple blood. "My God," John exclaimed from behind. "That was just... I don't even know how to describe it. We did it. I hope to kill a freaking cryptid." And for the first time in nearly my entire life, I smiled, amused by John's enthusiasm and proud of our teamwork. I scurried over back to him. He held out his hand in the air for some strange reason as I approached. "Why are you doing that, Doctor?" I inquired. "It's a high five. You never done it before." "No, but I'd be willing to try." I reached down my right hand and slapped my palm against his, to which he immediately snarled in pain as he grasped his wrist. I forgot about the strength. I'll be fine," he whined, vigorously shaking his hand. "We should quiet down, Doctor," I told him, "before something else hears us." Right, he followed up. "Well, I guess you could say that I'm the brains and you're the brawn." I turned and simply looked at him with a blank expression. He seemed to be slightly skittish, blushing mildly as he rubbed the hand that I had slapped with mine. "Let's get moving,"